Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of the podcast. And today we have an extremely special guest. We have Faiyad Fit on.
Assalamu alaikum, bro. How you doing?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Can't complain, bro. Amazing to be here. Really appreciate you for having me on.
I really appreciate you for coming on. Do you mind giving yourself a bit of a brief introduction and discussing what your YouTube channel is about, as well as why you specifically decided to focus in on the Muslim self-improvement sphere?
Absolutely, bro. Bismillah Rahmanir Rahim. I want to give everybody that tuned in a warm welcome to this amazing podcast, inshallah. I always not disliked, but I always found these interesting when I was in school and they would ask you, tell us a little bit about yourself, give us an icebreaker. There was just so much that I wanted to say, but it was a short amount of time, and you had to make it count. So I guess to keep that tradition, I'm 26 years old. Allahumma barik. I'm one of the founders of the Three Muslims podcast on YouTube, which some of you might know and be aware of. I have lived my life being very disenfranchised and disillusioned growing up, seeing those that are around me being role models and looking up to people that I shouldn't be looking up to. And the people that I should be looking up to, they weren't really there. Allahumma barak, I had very amazing parents, right? But I'm an only child. I didn't have siblings growing up. I didn't have people my age. So when I was looking for people, it was oftentimes the wrong crowd. And I noticed that there were two extremes in the, I guess you could say, sphere today. There were Muslims that were very on point Islamically, very on point with their deen. Let's say they're the hafiz of the Quran. They're on point with doing Quran every day. You could ask them any question, bro. They had so much knowledge, subhanAllah. But when you would bring up something like, let's say, involving women or involving nofap and some of the things that the youth are struggling, stuck for Allah, brother. How dare you talk about that? This is a place of God. We shouldn't talk about that. Maybe they had a protruding belly. Maybe they had love handles. Maybe they didn't have their physique on point. They didn't know what reps and sets were, right? And then you got the other extreme of people that knew what these things were. They knew all about fitness, masculinity, talking to women, all this stuff, dunya-wise, making money, right? But they lost sight of their relationship with God. Many of them were non-Muslim. Many of them were hypocrites. It's not my place to call it, but just in outwardly with their actions, right? They would at least be outwardly disobeying and defiantly disobeying Allah. And many of them were womanizers. They were following our pill or pickup, and they were just upping their body count every week on a Friday at the club. And I realized if I want to, as humans, first of all, we need love and belongingness. We need to feel included. So when I would try to fit in with one of the clubs, which was the first one, the former, I realized that I was becoming more spiritually whole. But in terms of the dunya, I feel like these people let go of it. With the latter, I was getting stripes in the dunya. I was getting attention from women. I was getting, money, and the dunya was very easy, right? But it was too hedonistic. These people weren't praying. These people were doing substances, stuff for Allah. So I realized instead of just complaining why I don't have the role models that I want today, which we really do as the Prophet ﷺ, right? But I'm talking about a living example. I should just become that guy instead. And that's why I started my YouTube channel, to just make it Muslim self-improvement, to be that older brother that I wish I had growing up, and to combine deen and dunya. And lastly, I want to add this point too. I don't like that there's this dichotomy between deen and dunya, because if you're really on your deen, you should be prioritizing dunya. Because did the Prophet ﷺ not have his chest in line with his belly? Was he not lifting kilos of armor, bro? Like, I think 10, 20 kilos of armor after the age of 50, leading like more than a dozen battles, bro. Did he not do that? How could he do that if he was out of shape? Did a lot of the Sahaba not have money and wealth? A lot of wealth, right? So my problem with this deen and dunya dichotomy is you fail to even understand deen. Because if you're prioritizing deen, you're going to prioritize this life too. Because this life gets you into the next life. And that's all I focus on in Faiyad Fit. Just getting you into the akhirah, inshallah, but also maximizing the dunya.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It's more so looking at the things from the middle path, not to look towards both extremes, as well as you want to look at the dunya for this world from the perspective of the next world, where you're using your understanding of religion to serve as a guidance for your rational function. And as you've discussed, a lot of people in the red pill sphere, they lack that semblance of guidance. And I do think you brought this up as well, where in another video where you discuss that people in the red pill, or those who chase their hedonistic desires, they get lost in this world and they do not feel fulfilled spiritually. Why? Because they look at all these other things to fulfill that need. But you cannot fully fulfill that need until it is close to your natural predisposition. To go back a little bit in terms of starting the Three Muslim podcast, how has your ability online as a speaker changed from the start of the Three Muslims podcast to how it is now? And what sort of lessons have you learned along the way?
Beautiful question, bro. Jazakallah khair. It evolved a lot completely. And I think that this is one of those things you have to just shut off your mind and just do. And you learn as you go. It's kind of like basketball. You can learn about free throws and angles, and you could learn everything, bro. Dribbling dynamics and unless you actually go on the court and have some skin in the game, bro, you're not going to be that good when push comes to shove. So similarly, speaking is something that has to be done not only with experience, but also watching yourself, replaying yourself, analyzing yourself. Why did you articulate something this way? Could you have used better vernacular to express something like an idea in your mind into words so that somebody else understands it? So not only is it something that if you watched yourself back, you understand, but you can understand that kindergartners could understand it. Someone in elementary school can understand it. Someone in high school can, someone even smarter than you can understand it, right? So orating or speaking is something that has to be worked on. It's a skill. It's not something that I think you should just do and continue to do because everyone loves to talk, bro. And people talk a lot. A lot of people talk way too much nowadays. They don't even have any idea about what the real world entails, and all they do is talk. So having a mouthpiece, having a silver tongue, as they say, it's not a bad thing. But I think that you should equally be learning, reading, and gaining more knowledge. So when you do speak, you have more to say. Sometimes I would wonder, why did we get 2 ears and 1 mouth? Right? There has to be a reason. So with the 3 Muslims, when I started, to give you guys a backstory, me and Anha were friends for many years, mainly before he was a Muslim. And up until the time where he became a Muslim, we did the Shahada, and we were friends for many years at this point, right? And as soon as he became a Muslim, I was also friends with Arami, obviously. And I said, why not let these two meet? One of my greatest skills as a kid was to get people to meet together, to synthesize things. So I got them to meet. And once we became, a trio, we were helping a brother, trying to give him dawah. Obviously, may Allah guide him. Didn't really work out, but that's how T3M started. I remember Anha was already a YouTuber at the time. So he had many years of experience. When he watched the replay of the first podcast we did, me, him, and Rami on Zoom, he was like, bro, you guys are horrible at speaking. And I was like, what are you talking about? It was a little bit of an ego because I was like, how dare you say something like that, bro? Like, I thought we did amazing. We prepared this topic amazing. We got the hadith. We got the ayah. What are you talking about? And he was like, bro, you guys are way too concerned about your audience. You guys are way too concerned about the camera. You look like you're looking at a camera and talking to a camera than talking to people. And I had no idea what he was talking about, bro. It's not until many months later when I looked back at that clip of the first podcast that we did from 2021. It was called Why Believe in God. It was the first episode we ever did on T3M, right? Barely any subs, nothing. And when I look at that now, I'm like, wow, I'm not present in the moment at all. I look like I'm talking to a camera. I'm in my head. I'm thinking about what I say too much. Whereas now, I simply don't care. I just shut off my brain and I just speak. It's like basketball, bro. The more you think about your performance in basketball, the worse you're going to do. Whereas if you're just in the moment and you're present, you're actually going to perform better as an athlete, right? So I will say the first biggest thing that contributed to my improvement as a speaker, Allahumma barik, obviously by the permission of Allah, is just experience. And it's something that as kids, when you're in school, you're afraid of public speaking or giving presentations. I was one of them. But exposure therapy or doing things over and over again really does work.
I find it really interesting how you brought up the fact that when he gave you that feedback, the ego was the first thing that stopped you from fully understanding it. But it wasn't until you took a step back and you reflected upon that experience or that feedback on how it gave you that you're able to understand and use it to improve. So it's essentially going back to taking the feedback and using it as a feedback loop where you make a mistake, you learn from the mistake, you make the mistake and you learn from the mistake. But a lot of people don't want to go through that due to the hit on their ego. How were you able to deal with that ego in that moment? And what recommendations do you have for somebody who's watching this video to be able to deal with their ego in terms of similar situations?
I wish I could tell them to take the advice that I'm about to give them because I myself didn't take this advice. It's to just kill your ego. Humble yourself before Allah humbles you. I had to learn the hard way. I had to have life bring me down to my knees, bro, and have nothing to lose and be at rock bottom for me to realize, okay, I'm actually nothing in this universe. And that's why ego is the enemy, bro. It is the worst thing in your way. I don't have perfectionism anymore. I don't have a fear of failure. Everything can be gone tomorrow. Everything could be gone tomorrow, bro. I'll work back on it from zero. Because if I built everything that I have, what little that I do have, right, that I currently have at the moment, just by the permission of Allah, nothing else, then it doesn't matter, bro. I think a lot of people have problem with ego because they want to portray themselves with an image and they want to be perfect, and they can't take advice because taking advice means that there's a deficiency or a flaw that you perhaps do have and you have to work on that. And many people don't want to accept that reality, myself included in the past. But right now, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that anybody who has a mustard seed of arrogance will not be accepted into Jannah. Or something along those lines. And then when the companions asked him, what is arrogance, right? And in the narration, he mentioned that there's many things, obviously, with arrogance, but one of them is you look down upon the people. So you cannot look at anybody that comes to you with advice or somebody that comes to you with your own best interest in mind and be like, oh my God, that's a hit to my ego. How dare you talk to me that way? And since then, it's changed my journey a lot. Plus, I will give a second answer two to this, which is more deen centric, which is the more Islamic knowledge that you gain, the more you realize you don't know anything. And the more you realize you don't know anything, the more you got to humble yourself. Because when you surround yourself with people of true, real, beneficial, sincere knowledge, and you realize how little you know actually, it kind of makes you feel like you ain't worth it, bro. Like all this cocky arrogance that a lot of men have, a lot of podcast bros that you see have, it's not going to amount to much.
To bring it back to what you were discussing before, where in order for you to achieve flow, you must stay in the present moment. One of the biggest things I do believe that blocks you entering the flow state is the ego. Because I don't believe ego in its essence is something bad. It's rather, where are you channeling that ego? I read a book, it's called Good to Great. And in that book, they talk about the most successful leaders are those that channel their ego into the mission rather than focusing that ego onto themselves. One thing I do find is that people, egos are hooked on how they look, on the pursuit of fame, rather than using it as an impetus towards growth. To tie this into the next question is, you brought up the point where for you to remove a sense of arrogance, you must first start by loving, accepting, and embracing fate. And that occurs through the reflection of death. How has the reflection of death in your life benefited you? And how other people use meditation or reflecting on death as a meditation to benefit them?
My journey with this was obviously with many things. I can't really disclose them, bro, obviously for Islamic reasons. But there were things in the past that really brought me close to death. You know, just seeing how close you can tiptoe around death and how many times you would cry to Allah to save you from things. And Allah did. And Allah does and always will. But you got to realize at some point, if you go back to these things, it's just gonna, any calamity or evil that befalls you is on you. It's not Allah. And if Allah saves you, take that as a sign to go back. And, you know, the fact that a lot of us can turn back to Allah, even born Muslims, we can revert back to Allah, come back to the natural path of obeying Allah. It's a blessing. But one of the things that I can think of was back in 2022, I believe, I was going through a really tough time, you know, in dunya. I'm not going to mention what it was, but anybody really close to me will know exactly what I'm talking about. I was going through something very tough in my life. It was one of those times where I'm sure we can all relate. You feel like there's just a cloud over your head at all given points of time. You wake up, you're thinking about that. You go to sleep, you're thinking about that. Even you wake up in the middle of the night and you're thinking about that. You can't just, you know, it's such a plague in your mind. It's like a cancer that's infiltrated your mind. And as I'm going through it, you know, I'm thinking obviously typical, you know, ego, main character energy. I'm thinking I'm the only one going through this right now. I'm in like my villain arc, like some anime. And all of a sudden I get this call from my dad. And he's like, my dada, my grandfather, his dad, Allah yarhamu, he passed away back in Bangladesh. And I'm like, what? It's one of those things. This was like the first time my ego really got shattered, because what is the ego? It's an understanding of the world around you, the perception around you, right? It's like your identity. Imagine tomorrow you wake up and you're just like, you wake up in another house and your house actually never existed. You kind of feel weird about it, right? You'd be like, what are all these memories? That's how I felt with my grandfather. And instantly, bro, I'm here facing the pain and the regret, you know. Oh, if only I called him this. If only I had one more phone call with him. If only I spent more time with him. You know, typical pain of regret, because people don't want the pain of discipline. And I'm going through all this. And before I know it, I'm on the plane with my dad, headed to Kuwait, because, you know, back on the way to Bangladesh, we stopped by Kuwait as a layover. It was a very like expensive flight too. It was like last minute. You just booked it the next day. We wanted to make it to the janazah, to the burial. So we're headed, you know, back to Bangladesh. And I'm on that plane. And me and my dad are just chilling. And we're like, subhanAllah, like we're always going through our own stress and life and dunya. And now none of that's on our mind. All we're thinking about is my grandfather. All we're thinking about is him. We're not thinking about anything else, bro. You know those things I was talking about, that there was that cloud over my head? Now it's like this bigger cloud is over that. And I was like, wow, this was actually nothing that I was going through. And one of the worst things is, I feel like Allah was just giving us signs to like further cement this even more. Was on the flight, on one of the flights back home to Bangladesh, we were on a plane, which, you know, obviously everyone hates turbulence and it's a very normal thing, right? But it's usually harmless. But we had this weird thing, bro, where the plane, as it was going straight, it just started going sideways like this.
Oh,
Like, I'm not talking like normal turbulence, which is like shaking like this or anything like this. That plane went like this. And it's to the point where if you're holding a glass of water like this, like the water is literally not going to just spill a bit. It's just going to fully come out, because it's like you're going like halfway to the side. And we're like, is this guy making a sharp turn? Like, what's going on? And then the plane kind of went back like this. So everyone stopped screaming. Everyone's calmed down now. And we're like, okay, alhamdulillah, hope that's a glitch in the matrix. That's like weird. And the plane just starts doing this again. And we're like, oh my God. So I look at my dad. And my dad, you know, he worked in aviation for many years. So even he was like, this is atypical. This is irregular. It's not supposed to happen like that. I'm just, trying to stay calm. And I'm like, as that's happening, everyone's screaming. I'm just thinking like, wow, we could literally die right now. And we're Muslim. Like, what a blessing to die as a Muslim. How many people can say that? I'm complaining about this big cloud over my head. Then my grandfather passed away. Allah yarhamu. Now this, it's like, we really don't know when our time is going to be there. And we have all these, audacious goals. I'm going to live till I'm this and that. And I'm going to do all these plans. But we don't know, bro. What guarantee do you have that you're going to make it to that? So anyway, as that plane kind of stabilizes, I'm like, wow, okay, go on the next flight too. And then we get to Bangladesh. As we're in Bangladesh, we finally get to the janazah and we see his body, right? It's been prepared before we got there because we got there within 24 hours. It was clean. And I remember I was getting these intrusive thoughts like, bro, just open your eyes. Look at us one last time. But it was just this cold flesh. Just he was there. I'm pretty sure we don't even know. I'm pretty sure the soul left. It was just the body. And as we got there was a lot of emotion. Everyone was just, there were people from different villages coming to us and telling us things. And we got to the actual burial site, the graveyard. There's all these du'as being cited and mentioned and different Quran recitation. And then me, my dad, and my uncle, my dad's brother, right? Because my dad only had one brother. So my grandfather had two sons. And me, the three of us, we lowered his body into the grave with our own two hands. And as we're doing it, bro, I've never felt him so heavy. He was an old man. But when someone's like passed away, the corpse is so heavy. And as we're lowering it into the grave, I'm wondering and I'm just thinking, and I was like, bro, subhanAllah, like, all that stuff that I was thinking of, none of that for a second is on my mind right now. The things that I thought would take months to finally overcome, the things that mentally took such a toll on me, I was like, this is going to take a minute to get past. It was gone within the blink of an eye. And as we lower the body fully into the grave and cover it up, with dirt, fully bury him, I'm just like, wow, just like that. Like, you literally come into this world and you're going to come out just like that. And I'll never forget this because there's one Jummah khutbah that I went to recently. And one of the sheikhs, as he was delivering the sermon, he was saying that, when you go into a hotel and you check into a hotel, it's just like, let's say you're there for a night or 2 nights, right? Like a weekend. You're just temporary traveling. You're going to take your bags out. You're probably going to put it there, but you're not going to make that your home. Like, you're not going to start rearranging the furniture. You're not going to start painting the walls. You're not going to start making it like your own permanent home, right? But the thing is, this life is a hotel. And why are we treating it like we're never going to check out when we don't even know when we're going to check out? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that every soul shall taste death. Meaning we know we will check out, but we're still making such a firm footing into this hotel, like treating it like it's our own, customizing it, taking the walls down, repainting that whole thing. What is the point of that, bro? The more experiences I had with things like this, the more that I was detached from the dunya. And obviously this is a reminder first and foremost to myself. I'm not perfect in this regard at all. But I do believe that the more you reflect on death by just surrounding yourself around things like the dead, the deceased, going to graveyards, just remembering how turbulent you are, just staying away from things like this. A lot of people think that like first of all, bro, this is my whole life in terms of my hustle, my grind, my connections, my work, everything is on my phone, my livelihood, right? This is the modern day. It is what it is. But other than that, so many people are so glued to this and scrolling on TikTok, they forget to be present in the moment in reality. And when you're not present, you forget to like pay attention to things like, for example, my grandfather passing away. A lot of people would have been like, oh, I'm not going back home. I'm going to just stay here. Or send my salams. Or is there a funeral fund? Take my credit card. Let me donate like $20 to it. That's the average person. Most people are not present like that. But when you do get present, you'll notice that these situations are all around you and everything will remind you of death. Imagine that I was just sleeping through that flight. That flight changed my life. If I was sleeping through that flight, I probably wouldn't have even realized everyone was screaming. I would land and everything would be normal. But the fact that I was awake, I was like, bro, what the hell is this pilot doing, bro? It felt like the autopilot or something was like glitching and the pilot was trying to like fight it. Bro, that completely humbled me, completely brought me to my knees. But it's like when you're on that plane and you're scared and you finally have like clarity of your priorities and you're just like making dua to Allah, you're so humble, right? Why do we not have that in like other times in our life? Why do we have to get pushed to that brink to be brought to our knees to then submit? Why do we not submit all the time? And it actually showed me like that's how we should be 24/7. With that level of sincerity, that level of humility, when we're in that like plane crash, about to crash, or potentially about to crash, the level of submission where no one's an atheist at that time, that's actually how we should be all the time.
It goes down to the we are forgotten forever, to him we shall return. And that constant reminder of death serves to help shatter the delusions you have of this reality. And I do like the point where you brought up the fact that you were grateful for the things you had. in those dark times because that served to give you the semblance of hope. Another thing that I really liked you brought up was the fact that this life is like the temporary shade of a tree. A lot of people find it very difficult to submit, or why do we always have to submit in order to learn things? I do believe that the reason why we have to submit is because God won't be able to show his traits of mercy, his traits of justice, unless we are put down on our knees. Because it's those times when we get put down on our knees is when God is telling you that you need to ask him for something, that he's the most willing to give you things. To clarify, you're Canadian, correct?
Yeah. I mean, technically I wasn't born in Canada. I was born back home.
I would consider you Canadian because almost
We're
every
still Canadian.
Canadian nowadays.
Of course. Raised most of my life, just recently came to America.
Being a Desi person raised in Canada, how do you think that's helped to shape your mindset, that dichotomy between Eastern culture and Western culture? And what sort of impact has that had on you today?
I would say growing up, there was a lot of culture that I had, right? So I'm very grateful and blessed that I did have the privilege and the luxury of being born in another country and growing up there, and especially my own country. So when I came to Canada, until today, right, I'm very fluent in Bangla, the language in Bangladesh. I can hold down a conversation with everybody. A lot of the elders, I'm not trying to, boast right now, but a lot of the elders are like, bro, you don't even sound like you grew up here, you sound like you were, because most of the other kids, they don't even speak a letter of Bangla now. Unfortunately, but for me, I always try to do that with my parents. And my parents, they're probably going to be watching this. They know that every time I call them on the phone, I try not to speak in English unless need be, just to maintain that, because it is a skill. And it's going to be something just like, Quran recitation has to be repeatedly done to maintain that level of proficiency. So I try my best to do that. But aside from that, in terms of a lot of the cultural differences, there was a lot, bro. For example, many of the times when we come to Canada and you see like boys and girls playing together, it's a little weird, bro. Especially in like Quran, madrasa. A lot of the friends that I had that went to that, they didn't have that, Even for us, we didn't really interact with girls that much. So when we came to this country and I was like, oh my God, like you're just playing tag with girls, holding their hand and things like that in school. Everything's normal, it's what is this? I feel like that's one of the things with this public school system, which is why I will homeschool my kids and not send them to public school, is because I noticed that it kind of kills that barrier that we have, that restraint we have to the opposite gender very early on. It normalizes like touching and interacting with men and women and befriending them and stuff like that, which I think, sure, from a Dunya point of view, you have experience talking to them, but it's like, it's such a slippery slope, bro. I know so many kids that did XYZ as, in school and zina, and it's a very normal thing, unfortunately, today. So that's one thing that was very different, seeing how loose the culture was with men and women. Also, you go outside, women are just wearing next to nothing, and I was like, what is this? I'm not used to that, it's too much. It's just like the free mixing thing. It desensitizes you, Fitra, bro. Initially, I had this like disgust reaction. And then over time, I'm like, oh, this is normal. And then before you know it, you're caught up in that too. Many of us, right? So it's very difficult to maintain that if we're not living in a proper framework, right? But we're in the West, it is what it is. And then the last thing I noticed too growing up, when it came to having friends, I noticed that one thing I loved about Canada is it's more of a socialist country. So it doesn't care if you're Muslim, Christian, atheist, straight, gay, which obviously there's boundaries within our religion. But from a country point of view, it's very inclusive, very accepting. So everyone was friends, for one thing too, in Bangladesh, obviously everyone's Bengali. Came to Canada, you got whites, you got blacks, you got Asians, you got Hispanics, you got Pakistani, Bengali, Sunni, Shia, you got the whole shebang. And I grew up around a lot of Jamaicans in Toronto. And I grew up in like downtown Toronto. So I remember when I'm around all these people, I'm like, wow, it feels like all these different cultures coming together and we're all friends. We're all, you know what I mean? So it was a very nice experience learning about different names, different cultures. I grew up around a lot of Filipinos too, just learning about their culture and things like that. It's like you feel so refreshed. You know how lots of other mentions like we've made the land for you to travel, so you might learn about the people before you and the things like that. I feel that when you stay in a box, it's not good. This is why I'm also like, I personally don't know a single person in my circle that has not had an interracial marriage. I don't know a single one, bro. Every single person I know married outside of their ethnicity or their race. And it is what it is, and they're all Muslim. We all come together. Allahumma barik. Obviously, I know people in my family mainly marry Bengali, but I'm just saying, everyone I know around me, like friends and people in my circle, all interracial, bro. And I think it's a beautiful thing to experience different cultures. I just think that it's a problem when the cultures kind of supersede the deen. And I think, if we follow Islam, we're good. But taking culture, taking identity, there's no problem with that.
Yeah, I do believe it's a quote from Salahuddin where he talks about if you want to destroy a nation, you want to make promiscuity rampant. And that's something you saw coming to Canada where everywhere you walk around, women are dressed promiscuously because the West has told them that your value is based on how you look, not who you are as a person. One thing I do like about Canada as well is that it allows you to reframe that we are all humans rather than us getting stuck on racial prejudices due to the fact that we are raised in the West rather than in Pakistan or Bangladesh or India or Saudi Arabia, we get to experience different cultures. So then that allows us to look past those cultural and racial differences and to simply treat the other person as human. As you stated in our religion, an important thing is for us to learn from others, to learn from the differences we experience, but people get caught up in those differences. Why do you think mental health is such a taboo in the Desi culture?
Mental health is a taboo in Desi culture, bro, because many of our parents and family members, they didn't have the luxury of self-care and even to care about their mental health. They came here as immigrants with pretty much next to nothing. Even family I knew that were doctors, lawyers, engineers, established career professionals, right? They came here and they're driving cabs. That stuff doesn't really translate, right? So for them, they didn't care about mental health because whether they had to feel sad that day, whether they were feeling happy that day, whether they were feeling good and up for it, they still went out there and provided. Our parents, many of them, Allah Mubarak, may Allah preserve them and grant them the best of palaces in Jannah for all of their contributions. Allahumma ameen. They really struggled, bro, just to give us a normal life. And that's why for them, it's very normal to kind of throw away these mental health things. It's like you see these things. I'm not going to mention these things too much and get you canceled, but look at the alphabet gang, for example, right? Wondering what my identity is. This is such a newfound concept. 99% of the world and civilization since human history is still battling famine, poverty, and just getting by to tomorrow. They don't know if they're going to get food. They don't know the next drop of water they're going to consume. So for them, wondering, oh my God, am I a they or a this or that? They don't care about this, bro. This is such like a modern luxury to even wonder about your pronoun, right? And that's why you see that here in the West. So with our parents, it's kind of the other extreme where, yes, a lot of them are neglected. A lot of them were abused. A lot of them went through trauma. And they came here with every hardship, they still pulled through and stayed strong to give us a good life. And because of that, they're a little bit calloused, a little bit rough around the edges. They're a little bit desensitized to some of the soft vicissitudes that the youth are going through today. So my point is, when you look at our parents, many of the times it's easy to just look at them as, oh, they're just out of touch, they're old school, they're strict, they're rough, they're traumatized, they got a chip on their shoulder. But you got to ask yourself, my G, why do they have that? They have that because they gave you the right to even be bothered by these things so that you could have a good upbringing, right? And this is why many of the times that, I grow up, I want to make a video about this on Faiyad very soon too, inshallah. May Allah allow that. Is you see a lot of people that they don't look at their parents as human anymore. And many of the parents, they've done such a good job at providing and giving us a good life that it's just normal for us to just look at them as caretakers. When we were sick, it doesn't matter if they're sick. They're putting everything down and just focusing on us, making us feel better. So many times growing up, we feel that, oh my God, their job is just to look after us. We forget that they're the main character of their story, the way that we think we're the main character of our story, and they're just a side character in our story, like their parents. We forget they're human too. To me, my mom's identity is mother. As in, to me, it's still ego. Like I'm the center, right? It's egocentrism. My dad is a father, right? But I forget he's his own man. He has bad days. He has good days. My mom has bad days. My mom has good days. They have feelings too. They need love too. They need attention too. They're not robots, but they do such a good job at taking care of us. Sometimes we forget that. And this is why I want to make that very known in the video that I'm going to film. And may Allah allow us to always keep our parents close and have a good relationship with them. Because the older that I get, I realize that many of the things that they said, they were right. I was arrogant. I had to find out the hard way. And, we live in a culture today that kind of promotes a lot of division, early age, like you say a lot in your videos, right? The school system kind of programs you. And as it programs you to be away from your parents, right? Programs you to be looking at them as bad people, but looking at teachers who don't know anything about reality as authority and public figures. So it kind of alienates you and integrates you from your parents. So my problem with this is many of the times people don't call their parents. It's very normal in these like kuffar countries. You talk to somebody, oh, how's your parents doing? Oh, I don't know. I haven't talked to Scott in 10 years. What you mean, Scott? You literally call your dad by his first name, Scott. You don't even call him dad or father or something. And you think it's normal that you haven't talked to him in 10 years. Like that stuff is bizarre to me, especially as a Muslim. We shouldn't hold grudges for more than 3 days with a brother or a sister in Islam, right? but just seeing how normal it is, and also I feel like Netflix and Hollywood, it does a perfect cherry on top to the programming, because never did I watch a TV show or movie growing up where there wasn't like a divorced couple co-parenting. Like think of Sweet Life of Zach and Cody or any of these shows we watched growing up. It was always like a divorced parent co-parenting where the dad was like a deadbeat, right? And they just try to divide the family unit from the inside out. And that's why I think that they've completely ruined and crumbled the family unit from the back end. And that's why no matter how much you can try to, make things appear good, it's not going to be. I love and cannot stress enough the importance of the family unit from Islam and how much Islam promotes us being good to our parents, not even saying oof to our parents because of how they raised us and how they cleaned our behinds, bro. Our parents, they didn't just look after us, but they looked after us at the expense of themselves. And I think as men, especially obviously women too, but as men that are watching, you got to take care of your parents. You got to be working towards a place that you can take care of them. You can look after them whenever you can, make their lives easier. And if you don't, and you don't care about them, I genuinely think you're a lesser man, that you're not a high value man. If you're older and you could be moving out and you could be starting a marriage, starting a family, having your own spot, but you're choosing to pay bills and put food on the table for your parents because they're not making enough, you're a real man, bro, in my books. And if you're not doing that and you're forgetting about them, I think you're a lesser man, bro.
From an Islamic perspective, how do you find meaning in the suffering you experience?
I generally think it comes back to the presence that I'm talking about. Most people are not present, they're absent minded. So when they go through things in life, they don't even realize what they go through, let alone extract the lessons and wisdom from it that they can learn. I think many times when we don't have consciousness, it's usually because of the things that we're distracting ourselves with. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, that this world is just a temporary delusion for everyone, not just the believers, for everyone, right? So it's all about understanding that if we take a step back and have a few minutes a day to think about Allah, to read the Quran, to recite, to reflect, it centers you, bro. It centers you and it gives you a clarity that you don't have usually. You don't need to go to Umrah to get that clarity, my guy. You don't need to do all these things to finally get that clarity. You can have it for free in your home. Just take 5 minutes to just think. We don't even give ourselves that opportunity. I'm not saying like meditate for hours. I'm saying just sit down in the dark, close your eyes, and just think. Think about your life. Think about all the things you're going through. And I promise you, you will connect dots. And sometimes, we can all think about times where we've had a lot of consciousness, right? And we think about, oh my God, I feel like Allah's speaking to me or Allah's giving me signs like directly, right? It's not that Allah's giving you things then. Is Allah always put these signs around you anyway? But you're just too deluded to notice them and to perceive them. You're covered. You're distracted. Whereas when you unveil yourself, you finally start to notice everything around you. I'll give you an example. There was this one, I forgot, I don't think I knew this girl, but in uni, I was driving to school one day and there was this girl crossing the street. It was like an Asian girl. If you know anything about these the ABGs, the Asian baby girls, they're basically the Asian girls that come from China, international student. Their daddy paid for their tuition. They're driving a Maserati to school, wearing Balenciaga, literally like main character energy, like it's a runway, right? And she's walking and she got the AirPods in. She's all like zoomed in on WeChat. You already know the vibes. I almost ran her over. So kind of like she didn't even notice. And there was another car that was honking. And bro, it was a summer day and there was a beautiful butterfly that was just flapping. And it was like a nice monarch butterfly, big butterfly, looked like it's been alive for a few years, Allahumma barik. And it was just flapping and it was just going around her. And it almost looked like it was trying to get her attention, but she probably didn't even notice. She was just on her phone. And how many times do we have things like this around us, but we don't even notice? How many times do we have things like this that not only are around us, but are beautiful things to witness, but we're just so captivated by minute, mundane dunya things that we don't even notice that, subhanAllah.
Do you believe that a lack of purpose is the reason why men are no longer chivalrous? And how can you use self-improvement as a way to build that sense of chivalry that's lacking in modern society?
When you say chivalry, you're talking about the more conventional definition, right? Of being gentlemen, like taking care of women like that.
Yeah, futua.
Yeah, yeah, very good, bro. I think many of the times growing up in today's society, we fail to realize the correct approach that we should have towards women, right? Especially in a lot of the Desi households. Don't talk to women. Don't watch this. Lower your gaze, right? And all of a sudden, when you're 30 with no wife, or you got a wife and you can't have kids, oh my God, why don't you have kids, right? The problem that I see today, many times growing up, is we fail to understand how we have to interact with women. And many times when we're single, we try to find that balance. We try to strike that balance between maintaining being halal, but also gaining experience, right? And I feel that a lot of the times this gentleman like behavior that we should have towards women, where we're just that guy, we just take care of them and we're like a father figure to them, not like a little boy where they're like the mommy, because women hate that dynamic, bro. I talked about this in a YouTube video recently about our pill and how it kind of programs you to have a warped perception of women, where you just look at them as just essentially a genital. Just that they just got to hit and attain onto the next victory, you know. But before that, a lot of men grow up as feminists. They grow up, you know, in this world putting women on a pedestal, that women are angels. If she cheats on you, it's your fault. You were not giving her attention, XYZ. And I think that being in these two extremes is not that good. Looking at Islam, it provides you the perfect example of how we should be with our women. Obviously, looking at the examples of how the Prophet ﷺ interacted with his wives and just how much rahmah he had towards them, never resorting to violence, always taking care of them, right? And just looking at the little things he did. Like these were men, bro, in battle. If you knew the things that they did in battle, their combat proficiency, bro, is on another level. Yeah, the Prophet ﷺ, when he would be with Aisha radiallahu anha, you know, Aisha would drink from a certain position on the cup, and the Prophet ﷺ would pick up the cup and rotate it to drink from the same spot. Little things like that, just to show that he cared. You know, these were men that perfectly embodied masculinity, being qawwam, right? But then also had that nice emotional connection with their women. They knew how to speak to women. Unfortunately, today, many of the brothers that I coach, you know, regularly, many of my clients, I gotta teach them how to speak to women, how to speak to their wives, because they speak to women the way that they speak to their brothers. Too logical, too rational. They don't speak to women in a way that makes them feel listened to, make them feel heard. They're way too logical and linear with women, and you can't speak to women like that, unfortunately. So I think chivalry will come with studying the deen and also just understanding just how weak women are. And sometimes I feel that obviously there's two extremes, but if you spend time around your mother, your sisters, you know, women that are under your responsibility, it's very hard to look at them in a red pill lens. It's very hard to look at them as, oh, some guy's gonna run game and pick them up. Bro, you would knock their jaw if they did that, right? It's very hard to look at them too superficial. So you have to have rahmah when you look at them. But I think there is an extreme with that where you're just only surrounded by sisters and women, you don't have men in your life, and now you're too soft, right? But I think find that balance. You got to be a man, but it's truly after you become a man and get on point that you realize that women are very vulnerable and impressionable and easily influenced and dependent and frail, and you have to protect them. You know, opening doors for them, making sure they're taken care of, taking your jacket off. I love that stuff, bro. But when you kind of callous yourself and you are too weak as a man, she has no choice but to step up. So forget chivalry, bro. It's just like two men in the house, always like just clashing, bumping heads. You know, and I think that if you have a woman who's in her feminine, just keep her in that as much as you can. It's okay for a woman to keep her innocence and to be pure and happy. This is one of those things that I know a lot of people might say this is a double standard, but I'm not going to raise my sons the way I raise my daughters. With my sons, I'm going to push them and put trauma into their life. It'll build them, not like abuse, obviously, but put hardship into their life. Allow them to understand these things. With a woman, you don't want that. A happy, pure woman hasn't really gone through that, has she?
Why do you think postmodernists call Islam a misogynistic religion? Because the reason why I believe they call Islam misogynistic religion is due to the fact that Islam speaks to the true human condition, and postmodernism as a phenomenon wants to make everything subjective. So they attack any objective truth they see.
I agree with that. And on top of that, one of the reasons why postmodernists look at anything as misogyny today, and this is something that's not really talked about, but it's a compensatory social movement based on the actual misogynistic oppression of women. So I'm going to tell you this right now, guys. I'm not pro feminism or any of this nonsense at all. And just because I'm not pro red pill either, it doesn't make me a feminist. I don't support any of these man-made ideologies. I'm here to tell you guys that as men, we don't feel shy or ashamed to claim that Islam is a patriarchal religion. We don't. We know that in many cases, you need two female witnesses for one male witness. Men have authority and women have to obey and women have to submit. Unless obviously he tells you to do something haram. Islam is unapologetically, bro, a patriarchal religion. But the problem is, even though Islam has men in positions of authority, responsibility, and leadership, genuine misogyny actually exists and has existed through time. When you look at the Arabs in pre-Islamic Arabia that were burying their daughters alive, that was misogyny, bro. That is the textbook definition of misogyny. I don't think that, for example, if a man tells his wife what to wear and who to hang out with, I don't think that's misogyny. I think he's doing his job, right? Today, postmodernists are going to call that toxically masculine, right? They're going to call that misogyny. I don't believe in that nonsense. But I think genuine misogyny has existed, especially in the West. Women, for example, first wave feminism, they just wanted the ability to just be seen as human, to just have the ability to have their own land, to just vote, things that Islam gave them the ability for, bro. Long ago, some of these things, right? Just to just be seen as human, just to work, bro, just to earn her own money. right? These are things Islam gave her long ago, obviously within the confines of Sharia, hundreds of years ago, maybe even over 1,000 years ago, right? But the problem is genuine misogyny existed in the West, where women didn't have rights as men. A lot of Judeo-Christian traditions are like this too. Many of these religions and Greek and Roman civilizations, especially obviously inspired by pagan religion and specifically Judaism and Christianity, you see a lot of misogyny in these religions too, where in these religions like women have to shut up, and when they're in church never do this, and if they do, for example, in I forget which religion it was, one of these religions and civilizations in Europe, it's pretty well known, I'm not going to say it over now, but if a man is caught cheating, right, like he has a wife and he has adultery zina with some other woman, the husband's wife is to be served the death penalty and to be punished for that, because it was deemed in the progressive West that if he cheated on you, you're not doing your job. So you are going to pay the punishment for him sleeping around with some other girl. This stuff, bro, is genuine misogyny. This is not, the way they say misogyny to anything. This is genuine misogyny. And my problem with this is when you have society going to one extreme, there is no choice but for it to compensatorily go to the other extreme to make up for it. Kind of like if you see in a lot of these, a very simple example. There is a race, I'm not going to mention again what it is, but there is a race, right, who was enslaved in the West. And this race was severely enslaved in the West at cotton fields and plantations and just completely abused, bro. And they didn't even have their rights. They were given American last names and they were bro, to the next degree enslaved. But now the problem is because of that, it's not good that it happened. Everyone agrees it's not good that it happened. You see a faction of them kind of coming back now and going to the other extreme. And they're just hating white people now. And I don't think two wrongs make a right. Do you get what I mean? The solution for feminism is not red pill. The solution to racism is not reverse racism or like to just hate white people. Do you get what I mean? It's not to just now say, okay, now we need to abolish this and put this in once upon a time enslaved race to superiority and to be the standard. Because this race that was enslaved now has extremist groups in Judaism, certain things that rhyme with ration of Islam. And what they will promote is essentially that only they and their race is saved by God and every other race is not. So I think it's very normal to see patterns in history when you have the suppressed or the oppressed kind of reclaim that upper hand and then suppress others. But it takes a stronger type of man, I would say, to be enslaved or be oppressed. But then when you have the ability to do something, you don't. Like do something retaliatory just for the sake of, you don't. And it reminds me of the hadith, I believe, that it goes along, the lines of either a Sahaba or somebody was coming to the Prophet ﷺ to kill him, right? And the Prophet ﷺ was taking a nap and this man was carrying a sword and came right to the Prophet ﷺ's body and had the sword basically up to his neck. And the Prophet ﷺ woke up, and the man was basically saying, who's going to save you now? And the Prophet ﷺ, many of us in that situation, we'd be like, oh my God, bro, that's it. I'm about to get just capital J, just off, just like that, And many of the people in the West, they'd be like, oh, this is what Islam promotes, We don't know what we would do, man. Many of us would be just ishing bricks. We don't know what we would do. The Prophet ﷺ woke up, just look at his masculinity, so calm. He looked at that man and he just responded, Allah. He's asking, who's going to save you now? He says, Allah. And the man was just shaking, bro. He didn't know what to do. He dropped the sword. And after he dropped the sword, he was on his knees, on his arms and knees, just crying. And the Prophet ﷺ picked up the sword and drew it to him now and said, who's going to save you now? And the man was obviously pleading, for forgiveness. And he was like, I didn't mean it like that. Please let me go. Spare me. And the Prophet ﷺ said, go. And he left. What a perfect example of, he could have had two wrongs. You did this to me, I'll do this to you. Doesn't Islam teach us that if you want to get revenge, as in like if wrong was done to you, you want to get your rights back, you can, but it's better for you to forgive.
Do you believe that the self-hatred Muslims experience today, which leads to the formation of a liberal mindset, comes from the civilizational divide between Muslim society and European civilization? Because I do feel that a lot of it stems from the othering of the Muslim from Europe, which the European has subconsciously taken into their psyche.
I think so. And it's perfectly exemplified in the white man's burden. When you have a race that's kind of expanded to the whole world, colonized everything, and keeps telling you and putting things into your head, into your ear, that they're the standard. You're uncivilized. You need them to just breathe, to just do normal things. Without them, you wouldn't know English. Without, like they're the standard. They're the gold seal of approval, right? You start to believe that every now and then, eventually over time, whether you like it or not. So you start to look at yourself as backdated, barbaric, old fashioned, Bedouin, and that you needed them. A perfect example of this is, I was looking at the time zones for France because I was trying to see the daylight savings for one of my clients. Because I have clients all around the world. I try to stay on top of the time zones and so we can call. And I was looking at, did daylight savings hit France or not? Because UK, Ireland, Berlin, Austria, and us in the West, we all hit daylight savings at a different time of the year. It's always like a 2-week lag period. I don't know why it is. And I think daylight savings as a whole is like a nonsense, but we can talk about that another day. I'm here searching what is the time in France? And it's like 13 time zones in France. And I was like, what the hell is that? So I click on that website, right? My guy, 13 different time zones in France.
What?
These men have basically expanded and colonized so much of the world. I'm talking from islands in the West, in the Caribbean, all the way to islands in the East, right? Near Australia and New Zealand, and everywhere in between, to the point where there's 13, including the area that they claimed in Antarctica, 13 time zones, bro.
What?
Crazy, right? And it just
Yeah.
goes to show like how much they've expanded. It's like, leave the world. My guy, you use salt and pepper. You had to come to India and the subcontinent to finally get spices and to just learn about normal things in life and other things. Many of the things were stolen, right? We don't need to get too much into that, but a lot of the scientific and technological advancements were stolen from the Muslims. So I'll give you a simple example. You can Google anything in modern medicine today, right? So for example, you can Google who invented this. The real answer I can give you is going to be a Muslim polymath from Syria or Egypt or somewhere, and I can show you exactly when they did that. But you're going to get some white guy from Britannica Encyclopedia from 1980 or 1800s, right? Because it's so much more civilized to say that a white European came up with it before you. So my issue with this is they've purported this false sense of arrogance and authority, and we've internalized that, which is why you go to India today. In India, my guy, I'm saying everyone is brown. We're just all different shades of brown. You will have internalized colonialism in India. You will have racism. You will have Indians more racist towards darker skinned Indians. And that didn't exist back then until Europe came and brainwashed them with this line of thinking. So I'm not racist towards white people, but I wish that the world has shown us examples of the reverse not being true. I've experienced racism in the West, and many of times we think that, oh my God, if only I was white and this, life would have been easier. I would have more opportunities, right? And this obviously today, it's like liberalism, all that, it's kind of reversed now. Now you have like forced diversity and ethnic quotas and all this and employment and acceptances in universities. But, affirmative action, obviously, the politics more than me. But my point is back then, it wasn't like that. Growing up, I genuinely believed that, like, oh my God, if only I wasn't a fob, I was born here. If only my name was like Matt or something, how different life would be. You think these things, bro, because that's the Kool-Aid that they feed you.
How do you destroy those false belief patterns that an individual would create about the innate superiority of the Western man? Because I view things more so not from an etiological lens where it's cause and effect, but teleology, where the trauma you experience creates certain beliefs. And those beliefs result in you interpreting your implicit memories or your memories in a certain manner.
How do we overcome this? That was a very good question. One of the things that I always recommend people is to study. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, the cure for ignorance is knowledge. We think that our religion is just backdated. We think that our religion doesn't know much. Look at how many scientific miracles are in the Quran. We shouldn't look at the Quran as a book of science. Yada, yada, yada. Sure, of course, I know. But when you look at the Quran and you see all these scientific miracles, you see all the early Muslims in the golden ages of Islam. If you study optics, bro, and then you look at what the double slit experiments and the things that the West did, you'll see 1,000 years of time apart. Like these men took time to catch up while we had everything figured out. So you realize that Muslims actually were more advanced. Objectively, we have better societies. Objectively, our women are happier. Objectively, there's lower divorce rate. Objectively, there's less mental health problems and people self-deleting. Objectively, we have more intelligence, right? Just look at advances in scientific technology and innovation and inventions back then compared to what the West is finally doing now. So it goes without saying that we have everything that we ever needed. Allah. But the problem is the world convinced you that you're empty and that you don't have enough. And that's one of the tricks of shaitan.
Do you believe that politics is a representation of the humans in that society, or is it the opposite? The humans in that society are a representation of the political situation they're in.
It goes both ways. There are societies that the politics have such a strong hold on the people and they control the narrative. For example, when you look at Americans today, yeah, sure, a lot of Americans identify as Americans, right? But a lot of them identify more as liberals before Americans or conservatives or Republicans before Americans. There's always that divide, and the politics really control that. Whereas you have other places, like, for example, in Malaysia, nobody cares about that. You know what I mean? Everyone's just Muslim first. Qatar, Muslim first. They don't care about that. There's no politics, right? Other Muslim countries, I can't say the same. Not going to name who, because obviously I'm going to go there too. And you got to play the game when you're in the Matrix. But my problem is a lot of people think that it's one or the other. You think that, politics control all the people, or you think that people can change things. I will say more of the former is true, but you'll have both that exist today.
Do you believe a lot of the mental health problems people suffer today can be solved simply by showing a semblance of courage?
I think many of the mental health problems that we have is caused by a system of medicine that profits off of the sick and the unhealthy and the poor, and they will over-categorize, over-diagnose, and over-disorderize any symptom of humanity into its own disease. There's 50 different types of phobias for the same thing when perhaps you're just normal, you're just human. And my issue with this is it creates a society of victims that are enabled now instead of taking accountability and just toughing it up. Yes, there's actual beta amyloid plaques. Again, this theory too has recently going to be overthrown. Even cutting edge research that's showing that, other than the Alzheimer's thing that I talked about, that there is no neurotransmitter imbalance linked to depression. Very cutting edge stuff, bro. But I'm not saying there's no correlation. There is a correlation, but there's no causation. So they're trying to find out the mechanism themselves now. But it's so easy to say, you're broken, take this drug, instead of saying, okay, maybe you're just lazy. How about that? What a concept. Maybe you're just not on point. Maybe you need to be a tougher of a soldier. But see, fixing you from the inside out doesn't really get them paid. But making you a lifetime patient and a consumer is going to get them paid, right? Big insurance bucks. So that's unfortunately the time that we live in today, where I can agree that there are legitimate mental health problems and things that can be seen in brain scans. Of course, may Allah make it easy on us, but majority of things are not. And I think that a lot of phobias, no matter what phobia you're talking about, because I do a lot of counseling too, many of the phobias that I've dealt with all stem from a fear of death. But they're just individualized into other phobias and fears.
My aim in life is psychiatry. So one issue I do find in the psychiatric industry is who defines what is normal?
Well, the DSM, bro, unfortunately, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is what is the gold standard in psychiatry and mental health and mental illness today. They've decided what is the parameter, what is the metric that we're going to use, what are the confounds, what is the standard deviation, what even is normal. And if you aren't on that, you're not. And you have this disease, right? My problem is, like, when are they going to realize that, for example, one of the variables with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? You'll see on the DSM that there's a 2-to-1 proportion of the patients that are male to women, meaning there's a 2-to-1 ratio of boys getting ADHD to girls. My guy, more boys are just hyper than girls. They're just more active than girls. This doesn't mean anything. This doesn't prove to me anything. Every boy has the ability to be hyper. But when you put them in this femme-centric, gynocentric education system, to be told to sit down and to just look at screens all day, of course they're going to lash out every now and then. Of course they're going to be hyper. Of course they're going to have difficulty sitting in their seats. And they're going to run around during recess and fight. That's what boys do. This is not one of those times where it's like, oh, boys will be boys when they essay a girl. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying just normal boy masculine behavior. Like, what's wrong with that?
The issue I have with the DSM is that it's a man-made phenomenon. Every year or so, they have to consistently update it. So what's considered normal today can be considered abnormal tomorrow. That is why I do believe that one of the largest solutions for the mental health pandemic in the West is simply to understand that there's a lack of spirituality. And the reason why there's a lack of spirituality is because post-enlightenment, the West threw away religion. And I believe a lot of psychiatrists, they more so, as we discussed, they have a very allopathic approach where everything is symptom, 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 symptom. They don't treat the underlying cause. And the underlying cause is a lack of a spiritual foundation in the West. What are some things you recommend for people to do to build that spiritual base?
Read the Quran and start praying and start reflecting on gratitude. Because one of the biggest things that we know from the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, if you are grateful, then I will increase you. And many of the times we get caught up in this loop of dunya, losing spirituality, because the dunya is designed to help you be a perfect slave that's always in competition to other people, comparing and contrasting your lives. You go on Instagram, who has more followers, who has more fame, who has more women, who has more likes, who has more comments, right? It's all an algorithm junkie. You go outside into the real world, into this, into that. Oh, how much money do you make? You go to marry a guy's daughter, for God's sake, and the first question he's going to ask you today is, how much do you earn? Are you serious, bro? And I don't blame them, because this is the capitalistic world that we live in now. But many of us have let go of our relationship with Allah and focus too much on dunya. I think the perfect antidote to that is forget comparing yourself to other people. Be grateful for what you do have. And as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, if you have to compare yourself to anybody, then compare yourself to those that are beneath you. You can be grateful and you can understand the value of the things that you have been blessed with. And the best thing that we can do is to seek knowledge, read the Quran, pray more, and just reflect and be grateful to Allah and be cognizant of these things. Because there's people in the world right now that would give an arm and a leg to trade shoes for you, because your worst day is immensely better than their best day, bro. They've never experienced any of the things that you have in terms of commodities and luxurious advancements in your life.
How do you think the tawakkul, those in the occupied state, has impacted the Western mindset?
What do you mean?
Despite the fact that they've lost everything, they still continue to believe and they still smile in the moments of hardship they experience. While a lot of Westerners, just because they weren't able to get their favorite McDonald's meals, they have mental breakdowns.
I agree with that, bro. There's people, if you've worked in corporate in the West, you'll know like there's stupid things that people use. Like, for example, you'll find a coworker that just takes Wednesdays off. It's like a mental health day for him. What is that? And he just gets paid. You're paying for his mental health day. It's completely absurd to me. But you look at places like Gaza, and, may Allah make it easy on the Muslims that are going through it. They're having their entire life thrown upside down. Loved ones just being offed right next to them for nothing, just for being born in that place. And that's their test. And we have to stand by them and help them in every way we can. And obviously make as much dua as we can, right? But there's so many lessons from this when you look at them, and they're basically in the complete front line of the battle. They have the most tawakkul and yaqeen in Islam and Allah than we can ever have. We're having a crisis of faith from the outside looking in, while they're going through it, and they're not even having a crisis of faith. Subhanallah. Allahumma barak. They're going through it, and you see a man holding his 2 dead children, and he's saying, La ilaha illallah. Subhanallah. How can you watch that and still be the same going on, complaining about why you didn't, your favorite store was out of this one order of this one thing that you like? How does that make sense, bro? So I think we should be more exposed to that, and it's not a bad thing. When you watch a bad ad, right? What is a bad ad? You watch something difficult to watch, you see a reel. Shaitan wants you to keep scrolling. But that little bit of humanness that you have in you that wants to watch that and see that and notice that, oh man, like subhanAllah, like I'm so grateful that's on me. And also, man, like let me make dua for them. Let me just take my own deen a little bit more seriously. That's real. Do not suppress that.
To tie it back to the first question, how do you aim to be an inspiration to those watching you?
Lead by example. That's it. And the best example that you could do is when no one's watching, because Allah is always watching. We have this personal scoreboard in our mind that's always keeping tally. Subconsciously, we appraise ourselves and give ourselves more worth day to day, or give ourselves less worth day to day, knowing how we did. And it's a real thing, bro, believe it or not. It's deeply in our self, psychologically speaking. And every day that you live, if you are genuinely that guy, meaning who you are, what you say, what you talk, you walk, right? If that's the case, behind closed doors, when no one's watching, you feel a sense of congruency that you otherwise wouldn't have. And it bleeds into how you carry yourself outside. So if you're good behind closed doors, off camera, then of course, in front of people, you're going to be good too. And this means not relapsing on nofap when no one's watching. This means not doing haram just because you have the ability to not get caught, right? Because Allah's always watching. Think about it, bro, during Ramadan, because late Eid Mubarak, by the way, to you. But Ramadan just passed by. Now, in Ramadan, let's say you're in a room and your family's in the other room and you have like a cookie or a brownie or something. You could eat it. No one's going to see you. Bro, I guarantee you probably still don't eat it because Allah's always watching. So Ramadan kind of forces you to have this taqwa, this God consciousness. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that we've prescribed fasting on you, perhaps that you might achieve taqwa, God consciousness, right? Because no matter what person's there, Allah's always watching. So I just want you to keep everything on point regardless of what the circumstances are and who's watching. So that will bleed into how you do everything else in your life and project into an overall standard that you maintain in every realm of human endeavor, like Andrew Tate says.
All right. Thank you so much, Faiyad, for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate your time and all the value you've provided. And all your courses, everything will be linked down in the description. And after everything he's given, I do believe that the only way we can give back by joining a high value Muslims club. And I usually end with are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
I love that.